Mark 15, and we are going to be speaking about the cross this morning. A lot of times when I get up here, I'm really excited. Like, I can't wait to get up here. And this is going to be shocking because whenever it comes to preaching the crucifixion, don't get me wrong, I think I preach the cross every time I'm up here. But there's always a sense of kind of intrepidation mixed with a bit of awe and even a little bit of fear when I come to the passage of the crucifixion, because it is holy ground. Really, if you get down to it, this is the holy of holies in the scripture. I mean, it literally, Hebrews defines this as the holy of holies. It's not just an expression. This is actually the most sacred place in the universe, is at the foot of the cross on Mount Calvary. And that's where we follow Jesus today. Being a missionary for 12 years, I missed a lot of things. I feel like Rip Van Winkle. I went to sleep over in Europe, came back, and America had changed. I can remember coming back one year, and there was these people running with like white things in their ears with little white cords coming down, and they're disappearing into their pants. It was back when the iPod was brand new. And I came off the plane, and I'm seeing, like, I'm picking up newspapers, and I'm seeing people, and even back in America, like on the news, it shows Angelina Jolie going for a run, and they're like talking about what she's wearing and what she's doing, and I'm like, what are all these things hanging out of people's ears? And so everyone laughed at me. They're like, dude, those are iPods, right? But it's kind of like you miss stuff when you're not living here. Fashizzle. I had no idea what people were, that I'm like, hey, you guys, I was back, you want to get together for shizzle? And I'm like, say what? Nobody in Europe says for shizzle. Just, these things that you miss, right? And John and I, we talk about history quite a bit. There are moments in history, I don't know if you do this, that you wish that you lived through them. You wish you could have been there for these momentous events in history. The Jesus movement is one of those where all the hippies up in San Francisco are like, getting saved, and they're turning from LSD to Jesus, and then they're forming all these communes and, just like hopping on buses and telling everybody they sit next to about Jesus, hitchhiking across the country, going on Grateful Dead tours and seeing, roadies converted. That was just a cool little phenomenon in American history. I wish I could have been there. I don't think I would have wanted to have not taken a bath and be a hippie. But I would have liked to have kind of experienced that phenomenon. Would have liked to have seen Jesse James in action, right? Watch him robbing a train, sticking it to the man. You know what I'm saying? I have a railroad runs right past my backyard, so that's very relevant. Trains. Who knows? Maybe that'll be my moonlighting career. I need money. World War II. The landing at Normandy, the amphibious land assault that they did, Operation Overlord. Would have loved to have been there. I visited Normandy. I've seen where the first bullet struck the house there. The Canadians we got a Canadian with us today. Very first action was from Canadians, yeah. And I would have loved to have, I wouldn't want to be there. Steven Spielberg, I think, did me proud. I get a little sense of that. Nobody wanted to be there that day. But these were momentous events in history that sometimes you look back and you say, man, that was a really great thing that happened, but I missed that. What we're going to be looking at today is one of those events in history. In fact, it's not one of those events. It is the event in history. And although you and I weren't there, this was written to take us there. This was actually an eyewitness account dictated by Peter to Mark, telling him people have to know. They have to come to this place where everyone else in this story got caught up. They have to be drawn into the story because they are a part of the story. This is the one thing in history you cannot afford to miss. You need to be there. And so Mark brings us there this morning. The day, as POD puts it, the day that they murdered love. The day that they took the Son of God and nailed him to a cross. And we find it picking up in verse 16 of Mark chapter 15. We've already seen Jesus judged. We've seen him on trial. We've seen him be paraded in front of the people. We've seen the people make a choice. And in fact, everybody who comes to this event makes a choice. They make a decision about whether Jesus really is who he says he is or not. And eternity hangs on this historic fact. You see, Christianity is not a philosophy. It's not like a system of beliefs that you come to. It's a person. And the most vital question this morning is, who is he and what does he have to do with my life? And as you come to that crossroad, all roads converge to this one point, and that is the question that we need to wrestle with this morning. So verse 16, and the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole battalion. Excuse me real quick. Joe, it's still really echoey. Is there anything you can try to do on that? And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him, and they began to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews! And they were striking his head with reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country. It's modern-day Lebanon, so he had traveled quite a ways. The father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. That's 9 a.m. It lasted, by the way, for 6 hours. That was very quick for a crucifixion. Crucifixions often took naturally up to 2 days. And so the Romans would break the kneecaps because, after all, it was a bit of a conveyor belt. Hundreds of people were crucified every day. So there were crosses that needed to be vacant because they were soon going to be occupied. But Jesus, it was 6 short hours. Of course, you know the scourging. Many of you have seen the Passion, and you know that by the time Jesus got to the cross, there was barely anything left of him. He had already been physically torn to shreds and ripped apart. By the way, this is a PG message today. It is not for the weak of heart. I'm not going to go into all the physical detail because the gospel writers don't do that. Mel Gibson went into that, but the fact of the matter is the gospel writers don't do that. Many of you will not watch The Passion of the Christ because you don't have the stomach for it. So I will spare you that. But that is, in fact, what it was meant to be. It was meant to be something so horrific that you thought to yourself, lodged into your brain, I don't care what happens to me for the rest of my life. That is the one thing on earth I never want to experience. It was meant to be a slow, agonizing death. And from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Jesus experienced it. It tells us, verse 26, in the inscription of the charge against him read, the King of the Jews. And with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right, one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads, saying, aha. That's a way in Jewish culture of saying, I told you so. Right? It's a way of really rubbing something in, salt in an open wound. You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. How ironic that you claimed that you would destroy the temple and raise it up. How ironic, and now you're hanging on a cross. How are you gonna come off and rebuild that temple? So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. And those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, and that's 3 p.m. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, he's calling Elijah. And someone ran and filled the sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let's see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain from the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that this was the way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. I said to you earlier that it's a bit difficult to preach this passage. Maybe I'm just weird. I know a lot of people can't wait to get here, but this is everything to me. This passage, it's kind of like when I do a wedding. I'm known for saying stupid things, and I tend to screw things up. So this is the one you don't want to screw up. You know what I mean? This is it. We've developed in Christianity a culture which, for lack of a better term, is kind of like sermon tasters. You know, we go out of a message, and if we really like it, we go, oh, good message. You know, oh, good message, Pastor. Right? And I don't mind you saying that to me. You know, I mean, it's not like I'm saying that's wrong, but that's fine. It's fine to do that. But sometimes what we do in here becomes kind of like a weird animal in its own right. Like we just come and we hear a message, and even if you cried, you get a little excited. I cried today, you know, and you go outside and you know, maybe you tweet, you know, I cried. It was awesome. The sermon wrecked me, man. It rocked me. But like, that's it, right? You can't do that with the cross. This is the place where when you come to it, you have to kind of, this is weird for me, it's kind of self-defeating. You're sitting in here listening to a sermon I'm giving, and I'm telling you, divorce yourself from that for a second. Like, kind of come away from the fact that you're here hearing a sermon. I want you to experience the fact that this is real, okay? There was a man named Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago who died. And before he went to the cross, he claimed, I will lay my life down. No one will take it from me. I am purposely, he kept telling them, I am going to Jerusalem. They will hand me over to the Gentiles, and I will be crucified. This is going to happen. And no one took him serious, but he kept saying he would lay his life down for others. He would lay his life down for the sheep. He kept talking about, I'm going to die, but I'm going to die for other people. I want you to realize that 2,000 years ago, Jesus came and he died for you. He died for you. I was a firefighter for about 4 years, and it's not uncommon in that line of work for people to lay their lives down to save others. It happens. The people that end up being the rescued, it affects them. People who have jumped on a grenade for other people have saved the lives, but also created a bit of a psychological dilemma for the people that are still alive. Any of you that have seen Saving Private Ryan, you know that he collapses at the gravestone at the very beginning, and he looks at his wife and says, tell me I've been a good man. And she doesn't understand what's come over him. And of course, we understand where this has come from at the very end of the movie, that the old man who collapses at the grave is Private Ryan, all grown up, a grandpa now, kids, grandkids. And all he wants to know was his life worth saving? It's haunted him for the rest of his life that someone would give their life for him. This is where you and I are at today. That Jesus considered you and I worth saving. It's not even a question. It's a fact. You were worth saving. Inherently in yourself? Heck no. I mean, you can't point in and go, oh yeah, you know, look at all this, you know, this was worth saving, you know. You can't do that. But the fact that he did it is proof. It takes a lot of convincing, doesn't it? Just like Private Ryan. Just like you. This is at the heart of everything in the Christian faith. Jesus can only be understood in light of the cross. He makes his famous statement right after we have John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And we all know that, and then we forget the next verses. The next verses after that, Jesus starts talking about the fact that just as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so also must the Son of Man be lifted up. And if you know that story, or if you don't worry if you don't know the answers to this quiz. You go back in time, back when the people of Israel were moving through the desert, and suddenly a plague of snakes broke out, poisonous snakes. Started biting everybody. There was an epidemic. They're all getting killed, right? And it was because of the wrath of God. And Moses prays and he says, God, don't punish these people. Don't do this. And God says, I want you to take a bronze serpent. These people were, they were bad. It wasn't like they're just walking along their way and God just, snakes. He's got a bunch of buttons he's pushing. Let's see what happens if I... No, they were deserving of judgment. Okay, they were doing horrible things. But Moses falls on his face and says, God, have mercy. I know you're a God of mercy. Have mercy. And God says, I tell you what you do. You put on a pole a bronze snake and you lift it up. And all they have to do is look to that snake. Look to that image on that pole, and they'll be saved. The weird thing was that people wouldn't look. That's what the Bible tells us. No! They're dying and they won't look. It's insanity. It's no different how when people won't look to the cross, because Jesus says, I too must be lifted up. I will save you. And in fact, he becomes. It's strange, isn't it, that a snake, the thing that's killing you, is what you're supposed to look to, right? Sin is what's killing us, like a poison going through our veins, ruining and wrecking our life, polluting everything. And yet the Bible says that when Jesus was lifted up, it says he became sin, or he was made sin for us. God took him and made him who knew no sin to be sin, to actually be a picture of that which was killing us. And the Bible goes on to say that we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus becomes a symbol of what's killing us. He becomes a picture of our sin. And as he's on there, he says, Father, forgive them. This is all about forgiveness. This is all about absorbing the wrath of God for us. And he says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. The very people that are mocking him, that have beaten him, that are spitting on him. There is saliva dripping down his face because they don't crucify people that high up. I know you see like 20 foot up in the air as Jesus. That's not how they did it. They did it so that your spit could reach him. They did it so you could almost look eye level with him and mock him and get up in his face and ridicule. These were personal attacks. And he says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Truth be told, we never really do when it comes to sin. If we could see sin the way that God did, we'd never do it. If we could understand the damage that it causes, we wouldn't do it. But here we see a picture of sin. Jesus made sin. Here we see a picture of sin in all of its glory. And we see what it does to us in the person of Christ. Guys, this is the ripping away of the curtain. This is the man pulling all the gears and levers behind the scenes. This is the Wizard of Oz. Not sin as it's glorified, not sin as it's presented as a bunch of fun, but sin as presented as absolutely and utterly destructive because it ripped the Son of God to shreds. When I was 23 years old, I was an assistant pastor at Refuge Huntington Beach. And these are the days before Bill Welsh was there. And the previous pastor had suffered a moral failure. And I remember sitting, getting ready to become the interim pastor for the next year. And I met with Calvary Outreach Fellowship, and the guy who headed Calvary Outreach Fellowship sat down with me, and he wanted to tell me what I needed to do next, and what the effects would be on the congregation, what the effects would be on the families involved. And I will never forget him saying to me, I was 23 years old, I hadn't lived very long. He said to me, "You are now going to begin." He kind of like arched his eyebrow. It was weird. It was like something out of a movie, like when they, like in The Matrix, when the architect's behind the desk and he's like, he's making these. It was like that, I swear to you. And he says, "You are about to see right now the destruction that sin causes. It is going to continue on in a ripple effect now." There were 2 families involved. This morning, as I speak, one of those kids is in the ground as a result of what happened. One disappeared to China, wanted nothing to do with his old life. Another, although she's walking close to the Lord, refuses to have kids because of the devastation that was caused to her during her formative years. That's just one of the families. Here in this story, we see sin, but by God choosing to deal with sin the way he does, we see God's triumph over sin. We see the way that God deals with it. The word crux is connected to the word crucifix. It means at the heart of everything. It means a crossing. It means a focal point. You see, God uses the cross as everything to link to everything else. In the Old Testament, all the pictures, I just mentioned one, there was the tabernacle, there's all these things, they all come back to the cross. When Paul's speaking to the Galatians, he says, "For I labored to know nothing among you save Christ and him crucified." Everything in the scripture comes back to this. When the Bible tells you your behavior ought to change, what does it talk to you about? It doesn't just say, "Hey, stupid, do better next time." Couldn't it? That's how we think. "Hey, stupid, could have done better." The Bible points back, the New Testament points back to the cross. When Paul says, "For consider him who endured opposition from sinful men." They're suffering, they're experiencing persecution, and he goes, "Go back to the cross. Go back to the cross." That's everything. We have our brother Dennis, who's in jail right now, and he's been struggling through this, trying to deal with this. Remember to pray for him, like Hebrews 13 says, as if you were chained alongside of him. But Dennis has been reading 1 Peter. Well, 1 Peter is filled, isn't it, with what? "Beloved, don't be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you also may rejoice and be glad when glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you're blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name." He brings it back to the cross to tell us, look, if you're suffering, go back to Jesus and find your endurance there. Matthew Henry said it this way: "The sufferings of the meek and holy Redeemer are ever a source of instruction to the believer, of which in his best hours he cannot be weary. Did Jesus thus suffer, and shall I, a vile sinner, fret or repine? Shall I indulge anger or utter reproaches and threats because of troubles or injuries?" The cross connects to everything in my life, doesn't it? But to quote Winston Churchill, the day itself was a day that will forever live on in infamy. Mark doesn't focus on the details. You read the passage with me just now, and you know that Mark does not focus like the Passion on the goriness of it. He doesn't even talk about the way it was done, the methods of it. He focuses on the shame. You see, it was a shameful death. Deuteronomy talks about people that were hung on a tree, and that just means they were so rotten and so wicked that you did not honor them with a burial. See, burial speaks of resurrection, that they go into the ground and one day they're raised again. So you would literally hang them on a tree. And Deuteronomy comes in and says, "Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree." It was a way of again, passing by the road and going, ooh, don't want that to happen to me. I'm so cursed, considered cursed by men, cursed by God, that no one will even bury me. But here's Jesus, hung on a cross by crucifixion, an invention of the Persians, created hundreds of years earlier. They would line the roads up. They actually did it by impaling. They would come through the bottom of your body, go up into your skull, and you would be impaled on a stake. The Romans lined the roads. On the day that Spartacus died in battle, I am Spartacus. No, I am Spartacus. I couldn't resist. Any of you seen that movie? On the day that Spartacus died, for 160 miles, 6,000 Jewish slaves, or excuse me, not Jewish, 6,000 slaves had been crucified and had lined the roads. Can you imagine traveling for over 2 hours in your car at 60 miles an hour, and all you see on either side of you is people crucified? It was always done on the side of a road. It was done to shame them. It was a way of saying, don't do what this guy did. It was a way of humiliating them to the point where they lost control over their faculties. I said I wouldn't go into detail, just quickly so you understand. There would be something the equivalent of railroad ties that would go in between the radius and the ulna. You got 2 bones in your arm, and in between you got a nerve bundle, right? When you hit your funny bone, that's what runs through there. You know that you have carpal tunnel, right? The carpal tunnel runs between those bones, and God designed us in a way where those 2 bones protect that nerve bundle. Well, crucifixion wasn't done through the hands, as people often tell you. It was done through the wrist, to go right between those 2 bones. If you can imagine when you've hit your funny bone, have that hitting the nerves in your feet, and now you have lost all bodily function. And as you hang there in absolute jarring, excruciating pain, which is where that word excruciating comes from, is the word crucifixion. It is the most painful death on record. They've never devised anything more painful. Jesus hangs there suspended between heaven and earth, and they've stripped him naked. Talk about being humiliated. But as you lose control of your bodily functions, there is feces and urine and blood and sweat and tears and any bodily fluid you have slowly draining out. And on top of that, people were adding fluids to you. People would get urinated on. We're told in the scripture that they're spitting on him while this is happening. And I used to think that it was merciful to offer Jesus the sponge on a stick until I was doing research for Ephesians 6 on the armor of God, and I looked up the Roman kit, and I noticed in the Roman kit a sponge and a reed. And it had all of them itemized, and I looked up, what's a sponge and reed? And they said, that's the toilet kit of a Roman soldier. The reach around with the reed would help them to clean off, and they didn't have corn cobs or toilet paper. And so when that is held up, what would happen is that wine mixed with vinegar was a way of sanitizing the sponge. And there was a jar, Matthew tells us, at the foot of the cross. And you would take that sponge on a stick. See, Romans did this every day, so that was their joke. That you would get so thirsty while you're up there as you're losing so much fluid and blood that you would cry out like Jesus does. One of the 7 things he cries out is, I thirst. And they take that up there. And most victims of crucifixion were so thirsty, they didn't care what they were drinking. And it was a way to mock him. And they would want that fluid so bad, that wine mixed with vinegar, that would be filled with fecal matter in that jar. As all the soldiers would dip it in there. Boom, they hold it up to him. And it says, Jesus refused to drink it. You see, the interesting thing about the crucifixion was it was all meant to shame him, but the reality is that every attempt to shame him only brought him more honor. It only made him more beautiful. You see, that's what we did to God, to our shame. Everything that was done to him made us more shameful and him more beautiful. The more shame we heap on him, the more shame it reflects back on us. The more honor beams out of him for taking it. If you are the Son of God, then you will do such and such. You will come down from there. You will call armies from heaven. Elijah will answer you. And the fact is, he is the Son of God. And he proves it by staying up there. Is that how you would save the world? You know, if God were real, he wouldn't let all this happen. He wouldn't this. And I love how people are experts, on being God. If you ever read the Shel Silverstein poem about If I Were God for a Day, a little children's poem. And he says, I asked God if I could take the wheel of the world. And it shows a world with a big steering wheel on top. And this little dude gets on there and God's standing back and, he's trying to, and his first questions are, how long is my shift? How much will I get? It goes and lists all these things. And then God, the final punchline is when he says, give me back that wheel. I don't think you're ready yet. Is this how you would save the world? Would you even be able to love the people? Charlie mentioned that God is holy. He is so different from us. This is part of the holiness of God. The holiness of God is not just judgment for sin. The holiness of God is his incredible love, mercy, and forgiveness, which we, when we place ourselves as the judge, don't even have the capacity for understanding how holy and different he is from us. We can't even comprehend. We would never do something like this. Somebody slights me just even microscopically, and I brood on it for years. You? Is it just me? Confession time here. What would you do with people who despised you and spat on you while you're dying? I can't say has that ever happened to you before because you wouldn't be here, but if you were God dying for people and they were mocking you like little rebellious ants, and then they shoved a toilet brush in your mouth, what would you do? Everything he does just makes him more awesome. The way that he responds to this, for consider him who endured such opposition. Consider him. This is my king. This is my God. This is somebody who, if he is who he says he is worthy of even more honor and more worship. Worthy, worthy, worthy is the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. That this was in his heart to do this for me and to do for you. And this passage is filled with people who, in seeing this, putting all the pieces together, are watching him being dishonored and come out the other side giving him honor that they never imagined they would. There are three people in this story who go through an utter transformation through watching him. The first is Simon of Cyrene. And the scripture tells us that the Romans compel him. In verse 21, a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross, and they brought him. They force him. Here's the deal. Simon of Cyrene is coming, and he's forced to bear the patibula, which is the crossbeam of the cross, right? The stakes were permanently in the ground, and they would carry the patibula, the crossbeam. And as he's coming, Jesus can't even carry it anymore. That wasn't normal, by the way. It was because he just went through the scourging. Pilate hoping to set him free, trying to give the people at least a degree of compassion and mercy, realizing Jesus was innocent. Pilate being torn, scourges him so that they'll just go, oh my gosh, look what we've done to this guy. Okay, don't crucify him. That's enough. He'll have learned his lesson. But Jesus can't even hold himself together. He can barely even walk. So they have to find someone else. And Simon of Cyrene, he's coming from Lebanon, and as he comes, Libya, as he comes into the city, he's late, you guys. This is the day of Passover. He gets there, and he's only 3.5 hours or so from the time, 6.5 hours or so from the time where they're going to sacrifice the Passover lamb. They're going to sacrifice the Passover lamb, and he's barely made it into the streets of Jerusalem. And he's thinking, I'm late, I'm going to miss it. He's freaking out like you do when you're in the car and your GPS is telling you got 12 minutes, and you know you got to be there 5 minutes ago. And he's freaking out. It's a long journey. How ironic that he thought he was going to miss the Passover most of his journey, and he bumps straight in to Christ's Passover lamb and carries the crossbeam, and something happened to Simon of Cyrene as he's carrying the weight. I don't know if he got consumed. He somehow identified with Jesus. He felt connected to him. If you've ever saved a person's life before, you need to know what's happened to them. You feel connected to them. You call them up to see how they're doing. There's this bond that's formed, and somehow Jesus forms this bond. But in some way, shape, or form in Simon of Cyrene's life, he learns more about Jesus and he gets saved. Somehow he realizes that he was carrying my burden. It seemed like I was carrying his burden, but he was carrying my burden. You know how we know that? Because Mark tells you, oh, by the way, his children are Rufus and Alexander. As if you knew them. Oh, that's Simon of Cyrene. Okay, I thought you were talking about another Simon of Cyrene. Because Mark is writing from Rome. Peter is dictating to him the eyewitness accounts. And as Mark is writing this, he goes, oh, by the way, this Simon of Cyrene, you know his kids in Rome. Because when Paul writes Romans 16, he says, oh, and greet Rufus, who's one of the leaders of one of the Christian gatherings, one of the churches in Rome. In other words, Simon of Cyrene had been saved through this experience. He had come to realize that in his shame, this actually was the Son of God. The second person to be saved is one of the two thieves. They crucified him with common criminals. That's humiliating enough, probably to dishonor him. In fact, what's interesting is that Pilate puts that sign above his head, which says, the King of the Jews. And that was meant to be an insult, not to Jesus, I don't believe, but to the Jews. He was saying, this is your king. And I believe what Pilate was saying is, this is the best of you that I've ever met. He had no respect for the Jewish people. But with Jesus, he saw someone who carried himself like a king, who stood on trial with dignity, who stood out from all the other men that would throw themselves at his feet and beg for their lives, would cry and literally wet their robes on the marble floor in front of him. And here's Jesus. He doesn't even answer a word. It's as you say. My kingdom's not of this world. Yes, it is as you say, I am a king. Do you not realize I have power over? You'd have no power over me if it weren't granted from you by my Father in heaven. Pilate walks away stunned. His wife is having dreams about him. If you have that man, Jesus of Nazareth, have nothing to do with him. Pilate is in turmoil. He's trying to free him. It's this whole drama that unfolds. He goes before the people. If you read John's gospel, then he goes back in and talks to them. Then he goes back out before the people. And then he goes back in. He is trying to deliver him. And finally, the only homage he can pay to him is to put on a plaque, the King of the Jews. And even what appears to be mockery becomes God's way of praising him. As the soldiers beat him and put a royal robe on him, and they pull out his beard, and they say, prophesy who hits you. The irony of that is that every bit of that was prophesied. Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, every bit of it had been prophesied. And the very men that are saying, tell us who hits you, prophesy to us, don't even realize as they're doing that, they are fulfilling prophecy. It's amazing. And as these two thieves hear Jesus saying, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. They know that when they were put down on those crosses, they writhed in agony. They scream like little girls. As they're hanging there, they're yelling at the people, you're going to burn in hell for this, right? Kind of like you watch those old movies of, Tudor England, and they're all like standing up there getting ready to go, but God will judge you for this. And they have no teeth and they're spitting while they're doing it. These guys were saying and shouting obscenities at the crowd, not only at Jesus, because they start reviling him. They hear him saying, forgive them, Father, and they're making fun of him. And one of them has a Spirit of God hit his heart, and he says, hold on a second. You and I are guilty. This guy's done nothing. And he looks over at Jesus and he says, Lord, remember me when you enter into your kingdom. He looks to Jesus for salvation, just like that serpent. All he has to do is look over. He just says, remember me. There's no song or dance. There's no Jesus says, well, come to my 8-week class when we're done here. Jesus just says, I tell you the truth. You will be. I mean, even there, Jesus is all about saving other people. It's amazing. I tell you the truth. He didn't have to say that. He could say, well, maybe. He said, I want to tell you in your final moments, you will be with me today. Letting us know that you're never too bad for Jesus to come to him, and it's never too late. Maybe you're sitting there this morning and you're thinking, I'm a pretty rotten dude. I can tell all these guys, except for that guy talking right now, is a scumbag. No, I'm teasing. No, you can tell all those guys next to me are good, and that dude talking might be a scumbag. In fact, I'm sure he is. But you guys, all of us know, don't we? We all know that we're that thief on the cross. We all know. We all had to look over and say, Lord, you're innocent, I'm not. Lord, remember me. That's my story. That's the story of everyone in here who had that happen to them at some point where they realized, I need a Savior. That man found a Savior in a very unlikely place on death row right next to him. Maybe you're going to find him in some little Luther Burbank Elementary School in Long Beach, California this morning, sitting in little chairs that are made for kids, with chalkboards and stars hanging from the ceiling. I got saved in the back of a 66 Mustang, so that was an unlikely place, but hey, I got saved in style. It was fitting for him to be crucified between two thieves. The Bible says he was numbered with the transgressors, and he takes his place as a criminal, guilty of the greatest scandal of the universe, and that's what we call sin. In his life, which is just rebellion, selfishness, wanting your own way, wanting to be your own God. In life, he was called the friend of sinners. Why? Because he loved them. And here he is taking his place among them. And in death, just as in life, his only aim was to save them. And he's still saving them today. That is his aim right now, today, is to save you. And they chant from the crowd, you saved others. Save yourself now. But of course, the one thing he couldn't do then was save himself. If he was going to save anyone else, he could not save himself. The Jewish faith has always taught that there was a day coming where God would right all the wrongs and he would judge all evil. It was called the day of the Lord, the great and coming day of the Lord. It was also nicknamed the day of darkness. It tells us in the scripture here that the sky turns black at noon. And a supernatural darkness spreads over the land for 3 hours at the time where they're offering the sacrifice on the day of Passover. In the Old Testament, clouds were a sign of judgment. When clouds came, it was often believed, dark clouds, symbolically, when David writes in the Psalms about, the day of the Lord, he talks about clouds coming. It's overcast, lightnings, rumblings, thunders, all that kind of stuff. All that's happening as this is going on. And it was to fulfill what's said in Isaiah chapter 13, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation, to destroy sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark as its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant, and I will lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. And in Amos 8, 9 through 10, it says, and on that day I will make the sun go down at noon. I will darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your feasts into mourning, all your songs into lamentation. You'll bring sackcloth on every waist and baldness on every head. I will make it like mourning. Sorry, that was stupid. I will make it like mourning for an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day. God was going to punish all wickedness. But what nobody knew and what nobody could predict, what no one would have guessed, that it would be God himself who would intervene and intercept that wrath. That the day of the Lord would come, but it would not come in a way that they expected it. That God's wrath would be poured out, but not upon them. And this God of mercy, of covenant faithfulness that they had come to know and love would come, and he would avert his wrath from them, and he would put something in between them and him that would absorb the punishment intended for them. Just like when they worshiped, every single time they came before God, they had to have a sacrifice, understanding that something else, God is mercifully providing someone or something else innocent to die for me, to take the punishment, to take my punishment for what I've done. And God does that by sending Christ, his only Son. The imperfect Son goes free because the perfect Son takes the punishment. You see, God's love for us cost us dearly. We say that it's free. Salvation is free, but it came at a cost. It cost to himself. As one Puritan said, it cost God more to redeem us than it did to make us. There the Father unleashes his punishment and pours out his wrath on Jesus for sin, and it utterly and completely breaks him. The only thing that we hear Jesus crying out on here is, even though he says 6 other things, but here in Mark, he focuses on Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is the closest thing to pain or a cry of pain that Jesus will utter that day. Because when that darkness comes and the judgment is there, it's a symbol of God pouring out his wrath, and we don't get to see it, but we know what's happening. God is punishing him. And for the first time, Jesus feels when he cries out, my God, why have you abandoned me? He feels what it's like to be us in our everyday state without God. You see, we feel normal. He always basked in the love of the Father. Security, as if God were giving him a hug every second of the day. I always do what pleases him, the perfect Son said. Right? This is my beloved Son, the voice comes from heaven. But this time, and it says, he always does what pleases me, with whom I'm well pleased. And here we have the voice going back up to heaven saying, my God, why have you abandoned me? And I can imagine Jesus' eyes racing back and forth in fear. That's what he's feeling. He is terrified. He is absolutely alone. He is for the first time unsafe. He feels condemnation. He feels the weight of guilt, of God's anger and wrath. He's confused and he's afraid. And Matthew Henry writes this about this moment. Jesus, the maker of the world, was being unmade. Job 16, when Job is in his worst agony, he speaks, but he doesn't realize he's speaking prophetically when he says, if I speak, my pain is not lessened. If I forbear, how much of it leaves me? Surely God has worn me out. He has made me desolate. He has made desolate all my company. He has shriveled me up, which is a witness against me. Remember talking about your fluids? And my leanness has risen against me. It testifies to my face. He has torn me in his wrath. He has hated me. He has gnashed his teeth at me. My adversary sharpens his eyes against me. Men gape at me with their mouths. They have struck me insolently on the cheek. They mass themselves together against me. God gives me up to the ungodly and casts me into the hands of the wicked. I was at ease before, but now he has broken me apart. He has seized me by the neck and he has dashed me to pieces. He has set me back up as his target. His archers surround me. He slashes open my kidneys and does not spare me. He pours out all of my gall on the ground. He breaks me with breach upon breach. He runs at me like a warrior. I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin, and I have laid my strength in the dust. My face is red with weeping, and on my eyelids a deep darkness, although there was no violence in my hands, and my prayer was pure. This is where Jesus' heart breaks. When the soldiers put the spear into his side, the Bible says that water and blood come out mixed. Having been an RN, yes, I have had a million jobs. This is a sign of congestive heart failure. Jesus' heart has been filled with fluid from his lungs. The combination of a loss of blood and emotional trauma has taken its toll on him, and he has literally had his heart ruptured because his human frame could not endure what was happening to his soul spiritually. And now it's only a matter of time till Jesus drowns in his own fluids on the cross. And when his time comes, even then it's a cry of triumph, and he says, after crying out, "It is paid in full, it is finished," he summons up a little bit more strength, and he cries out from the cross, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." And he's gone. Standing at the foot of that cross is our third man in closing. And this won't take long because we're done. The man standing there is a centurion. Centurion was an elite Roman soldier. He's there presiding over all of the executions. He is a master of death. He would be the equivalent of a Joseph Mengele. He would probably have been so long entrenched in the art of torture that he would suggest things to the soldiers. He was an absolute killing machine. He had watched probably countless thousands of men die in different ways, with different attitudes, and yet he had never, ever seen a man die like this. So much so that as he stands there, he is stunned. So stunned that he forgets himself. And with gaping jaw, rank aside, the leadership of his men, his prestige, everything gone, and he says, "Surely this was the Son of God." It says, when he saw in the manner Jesus had died, not fighting the men that nailed him down on the cross, but literally, as he said, "I will lay my life down," literally giving himself and laying himself down as a sacrifice, dying so differently from every other man, like Napoleon, who wrote a long diatribe about Jesus and said, "I know men as a general. I have served with men, watched them die, watched them in hard circumstances, but there is no man I have ever seen like Jesus Christ." And the awesome thing this morning is it doesn't matter if you were there or not. You missed it in history, but you need not miss it this morning. You have seen the manner in which Jesus has died today. You have seen the people that have been changed. You have watched a soldier. You stand there with him now at the foot of the cross. And you have the opportunity to see what he sees. You have the opportunity to react as he reacts. You have the opportunity this morning to fall at his feet and to worship him. Maybe you've never done that before. Maybe you've never stood in awe of Jesus, but I want to tell you something. Jesus is literally on that cross, dying to know you. It's what it took. And like that centurion, it just takes a little bit of dying to yourself. Actually, it takes a lot, because Jesus said, if anyone would follow me, he must take up his own cross. Now it's your time to die. Now it's your time to die to all the things you've been living for, your ego, your pride, what your friends are going to think if you follow Jesus, all that stuff dies. Jesus says, the only way you can follow me. Brennan Manning put it this way. Jesus says, I am dying to save you. But then he whispers to us, are you ready to die just a little? That would be my question to you this morning. In view of what he's done, would you be willing to come and fall before him, the King, not only of the Jews, but the King of the universe, the one who has proven to you who he is, not only by his life, but by his death, and not only by these 3 people that have been changed, but by a room full of people right now who have been changed by him, because he didn't just die, he rose. And he's alive today. As you give yourself to him today and you say, I want to follow you, you are the Son of God, and you make that confession, like the Bible says, if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. That's God's way of looking over you and saying, I tell you today, you will. God gives you the assurance. Not a blind hope in the dark. Jesus looks at you today and says, I will save you. You just look to me. You look to me and be saved. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you this morning. Lord, it's actually the hour of the day for us, Lord, when you were in your deepest agony. And yet, Lord, you were not a victim. That's the amazing thing about this. We've looked at this passage, Lord. We've seen the horrible things that have been done to you. And yet we see, Lord, that you shine through it all, that you are exalted, Lord. That you have majesty in your weakness. In your humiliation being stripped bare, they stripped you of all of the dignities allowed to human beings, and yet you shine magnificently as God. Lord, I pray this morning if there's anyone who's been holding back, there's so many people in this story holding back. I'll believe if you hop off the cross. I'll believe if you do this. I'll do this if you do that. Or why don't you? And they've never stopped to marvel that the way that you handle them, even now shaking their fist at you, is proof of who you are. That you're patient, that you love them, and that you are waiting for them to finally surrender to you. Lord, I pray that they would surrender. They would just come to you and say, just forgive me. Father, I didn't know what I was doing. You are who you say you are. Take me, save me, and save them. In Jesus' name.